The town of Cedar Ridge sat nestled in the Oregon timber country, where the forests grew thick and the sawmill ran from dawn until dusk. It was 1892, and life moved to the rhythm of axes and seasons. James Thornton had been working the lumber camps for 30 years, his hands calloused and strong, his dark beard streaked with gray at 49 years old. He'd raised 4 children alone after his wife Rebecca died of fever 6 years back. The children were his whole world now: Clara, 14, Daniel, 11, little Rosie, 8, and Thomas, just 6 years old. On a warm September evening, James walked into town with a small pouch of coins to buy supplies. His children tagged along, as they often did, delighting in the rare trip away from their cabin in the woods. The main street bustled with activity, but something caught James's attention near the general store. An older couple stood with a young woman, maybe 22 or 23 years old. She wore a simple blue dress, her light brown hair braided and pinned. Her head was bowed, and even from a distance, James could see she'd been crying. The older man was speaking loudly with the store owner, gesturing toward the woman. $15, the man was saying. She's young, she's healthy, she can cook and clean and sew. $15 and she's yours. James felt his stomach turn. He moved closer, his children following. The young woman lifted her eyes briefly, and James saw such profound sadness there that it struck him like a physical blow. The store owner was shaking his head, uninterested. What's her defect? The store owner asked. No defect, the older woman said sharply. She just can't bear children. Married 3 years, nothing to show for it. Her husband sent her back, and we can't afford a mouth that won't produce grandchildren. James felt Clara's hand slip into his. His daughter was staring at the young woman with concern. Papa, she whispered, they're selling her like she's livestock. James knew he should walk away. He had 4 children to feed, a small cabin, and work that was hard and uncertain. Taking in another person, especially one who came with such heavy sorrow, was impractical at best. But James had learned something in his 49 years. The practical choice isn't always the right choice. He stepped forward. I'll give you $20, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The older couple's eyes lit up with greedy hope. The store owner looked surprised, and the young woman raised her head, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. $20? The older man said eagerly. Well now, that's a fair price for a hard-working girl. Not to buy her, James said firmly, looking directly at the young woman. $20 to settle whatever debt you feel she owes you. After that, she makes her own choices. He turned to the woman. What's your name, Miss? Carolyn, she said softly. Carolyn Brannan. Miss Brannan, James said gently. I am James Thornton. I live about 5 miles from here with my 4 children. We lost their mother some years back, and truth be told, we could use help. But more than that, you need a place where you're treated with dignity. I'm offering you work, fair wages when I can afford them, room and board, and respect. Nothing more, nothing less. If you want to come with us, you're welcome. If not, I'll give you the $20 and you can make your own way. Carolyn stared at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. You would do that? For a stranger? My wife used to say that strangers are just family we haven't met yet, James replied. I don't know if that's always true, but I'd like to think it can be. Behind him, little Rosie tugged on his coat. Papa, can she come home with us? She looks so sad. James smiled at his daughter, then looked back at Carolyn. Well, Carolyn looked at her parents, who were already counting imaginary money in their minds, caring nothing for her answer. Then she looked at James, at his kind eyes and honest face, at his children gathered around him with expressions of hope and curiosity. She took a breath. I'll come with you, she said, if you'll have me. James counted out $20 to Carolyn's parents, who took it without a word of goodbye to their daughter. Then he offered Carolyn his arm. Come on then, let's go home. The walk back to the cabin took over an hour. The children chattered around Carolyn, asking questions with the easy curiosity of youth. Clara walked beside her, occasionally squeezing her hand. By the time they reached the timber cabin set among the pines, the sun was setting, painting everything golden amber. It's not fancy, James said as he opened the door, but it's warm and dry. Carolyn stepped inside and felt something loosen in her chest. The cabin was modest but clean, with a large stone fireplace, a wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs, and evidence of family everywhere. Drawings hung on the walls, carved wooden animals sat on shelves, a half-finished quilt lay draped over a rocking chair. "Rebecca started that quilt," James said quietly, noticing where Carolyn was looking. "None of us have had the heart to finish it." Over the following weeks, Carolyn found her place in the household. She woke early to make breakfast while James prepared for work. She helped Clara with the mending and taught her more complex stitching patterns. She told stories to Rosie and Thomas, listened to Daniel's excited tales about frogs and fishing, and slowly, gradually, began to smile again. James watched her transformation with quiet satisfaction. He saw how gently she braided Drusie's hair, how patiently she taught Thomas his letters, how she laughed at Daniel's jokes even when they weren't funny. And he saw, too, the shadows that still crossed her face when she thought no one was looking. One evening, after the children were asleep, Carolyn and James sat on the porch. The forest was alive with night sounds, and stars scattered across the sky like spilled sugar. "Can I ask you something?" Carolyn said softly. "Of course." "Why did you really take me in? You don't know me." "I could be lazy or mean or a dozen other terrible things." James was quiet for a moment. "After Rebecca died, I was angry at the world, angry at God, angry at myself for not being able to save her. I forgot for a while what it meant to be kind. My children reminded me. They saw someone who needed help, and they didn't see a transaction or a burden. They just saw another person." He paused. "Besides, what your parents said about you being worthless because you can't bear children. That's just cruel ignorance talking." Tears filled Carolyn's eyes. "My husband said I was broken, that I was less than a woman." "Your husband was a fool," James said firmly but kindly. "A person's worth isn't measured in what they can produce or provide. It's measured in how they treat others, in the kindness they show, in the love they give. You've shown my children more maternal care in these few weeks than some women show their own blood children in a lifetime." "They make it easy," Carolyn said, smiling through her tears. "They're wonderful children, James. You've raised them well." "We're raising them," James corrected gently. "You're part of this family now, Carolyn, if you want to be." The seasons turned. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter to spring. Carolyn finished Rebecca's quilt and hung it on the wall. She planted a garden that flourished under her care. She nursed Thomas through a bad cold, helped Daniel build a tree house, taught Clara to read music from an old songbook she'd brought from her previous life, and showed Rosie how to make bread that rose light and perfect. James found himself looking forward to coming home each evening, to the sound of laughter and the smell of cooking, to Carolyn's smile and the way she made their cabin feel like a real home again. He recognized what he was feeling, and it frightened him a little. He loved Rebecca with his whole heart. The idea of loving someone else seemed like a betrayal. But Clara, wise beyond her 14 years, saw her father's struggle. One day, as they worked together in the garden, she said, "Mama would like Miss Carolyn, you know." James looked at his daughter in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "Because Mama loved us, and Miss Carolyn loves us too. Mama would want someone to love us when she couldn't anymore." Clara pulled a weed carefully. "And Papa," you smile again. "You haven't really smiled since Mama died." "Until now." That evening, James asked Carolyn to walk with him after supper. They strolled through the forest, where new growth pushed up through old leaves and birds sang their evening songs. "Carolyn," James began, "I need to say something, and I hope you'll forgive me if it's too forward." Carolyn looked at him with those clear eyes that had once held only sadness and now sparkled with life. "Go on. You came here as someone seeking shelter, and you've become, well, you've become family. The children adore you. The house feels whole again. And he paused, gathering courage, "I've come to care for you. Not as an employee or even just as a friend. I'm 50 years old, with 4 children and a modest life in the woods. But if you'd consider it, I'd be honored if you'd marry me. Not because you owe me anything, but because I believe we could build something good together." Carolyn was quiet for so long that James began to fear he'd made a terrible mistake. Then she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "James Thornton, when my parents sold me like a piece of furniture, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel valuable again, never feel wanted or loved. You gave me all of that back, You gave me a home and a family and a reason to wake up smiling. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I need shelter, but because I love you. I love you and those 4 beautiful children with everything I have." They were married the following month in a simple ceremony at the small church in Cedar Ridge. Clara served as maid of honor, the younger children as attendants, and half the town came to witness. Carolyn wore a cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself, with lace she'd saved from her old life. James wore his Sunday best, his beard freshly trimmed, his eyes shining. The years that followed were good years. The lumber business prospered enough to expand their cabin. The children grew strong and happy, calling Carolyn Mama within 6 months of the wedding. She never bore children of her own, but she often said she didn't need to. She had 4 children who needed her, and she needed them, and sometimes that's how families are supposed to work. On her 40th birthday, when James was 67 and their children were all grown with families of their own, Carolyn stood in the cabin they'd built together and looked at the photographs on the mantel. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, a life full of love and purpose. James came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy birthday, my dear." Carolyn leaned back against him. "Do you ever regret it, taking a chance on a stranger all those years ago?" James laughed softly. "Regret, Carolyn? You were the best $20 I ever spent." She swatted his arm playfully, but she was laughing too. "I prefer to think of it as the best investment you ever made." "That's more accurate," James agreed. He turned her to face him, his eyes still as kind as they'd been that first day. "You taught me something important, Carolyn. You taught me that family isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other every single day. It's about seeing worth in people that the world has thrown away." Carolyn smiled and kissed him softly. "We taught each other that," she said. "You saved me, but James, you let me save you too. You let me save all of you." That was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, and it was true. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from letting others love us, from accepting that we deserve kindness, from recognizing that our worth doesn't come from what we can produce but from who we are and how we love. Sometimes a family isn't the one we're born into but the one that forms around us when we're brave enough to say yes to unexpected grace. James and Carolyn Thornton lived long, full lives, surrounded always by the laughter of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And when people in Cedar Ridge told their story, they always ended the same way. Sometimes $20 can buy you nothing at all, and sometimes it can buy you everything that matters.